The bank rejected James Carter's dream without even glancing at his perfectly crafted plan. To them, he was just another black man unworthy of trust. Instead of giving up, he sparked a wave of public outrage, destroyed the reputation of those who humiliated him, and took a risk that could have left him with nothing. But the finale of his struggle shocked everyone watching his story. What happened next will stun even the most cynical. But let's start from the beginning. James Carter walked into the gleaming hall of the bank's headquarters. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor as the employees' gazes flickered over him with barely concealed disdain. In his hand was a briefcase containing a meticulously crafted business plan, the result of months of hard work. He was seeking a loan to open a chain of cafes that could not only generate profits, but also support farmers from underprivileged areas. As he moved through the waiting area, he noticed how quickly other clients seemed to be served, while the secretary delayed calling his name, repeatedly distracted by calls and paperwork. He waited longer than his scheduled appointment, but sat patiently, betraying no signs of frustration. When he was finally called, James entered the spacious office of the bank manager. Without even looking at him, the manager began flipping casually through the documents. The office was designed to exude prestige and authority, intensifying the pressure in the room. James confidently began presenting his project. His goal was straightforward: to create cafes that would not only be popular among locals, but also serve as a bridge for small-scale farmers to access the market. He provided numbers, explained how the project would generate profits, and emphasized the jobs it would create in underserved areas. The manager listened half-heartedly, occasionally casting judgmental glances at James. By the time Carter finished, the manager had already made up his mind. Flipping through the papers lazily, he set them on the desk and began explaining that the bank preferred safer projects. James felt the warmth drain from his body. The manager's arguments were shallow, thinly veiling the underlying message. The decision had nothing to do with business risks. It was personal, a subtle yet unmistakable rejection. As he left the bank, disappointment and anger weighed on his heart. Outside, James noticed a young farmer selling vegetables from his truck and an elderly woman discussing prices with him. They were part of the very community he aimed to uplift. At that moment, he realized this wasn't the end. His fight was only beginning. After the humiliation at the bank, James Carter refused to let despair take over. He understood that if his plan didn't fit into the traditional system, he would have to find another way forward. Returning home, he recorded a short video for social media, sharing his experience. In the video, he detailed how his project was rejected despite having a solid business plan, and hinted that the refusal may have been due to prejudice rather than merit. The video went viral. People from all over the country began sharing their own stories of discrimination in banking. Posts accumulated thousands of likes and comments. James became a symbol of injustice, and his story caught the attention of local journalists. Several reporters requested interviews, and soon his face appeared on the front pages of city news outlets. Meanwhile, James reached out to his uncle Jerome, a veteran of the banking industry who had left due to its unfair practices. Jerome became his mentor, teaching him how the credit system worked and helping him identify weaknesses within the structure of the bank that had denied him. Together, they analyzed public reports, legal cases, and customer reviews to gather evidence of systemic discrimination. James also partnered with a group of local lawyers specializing in minority rights. They agreed to assist him pro bono, as the case had the potential to set a significant precedent. Through meticulous investigation, the team uncovered a pattern of the bank routinely denying loans to black entrepreneurs while approving them for white counterparts with less convincing business plans. At the same time, James began exploring alternative funding options. He arranged a series of meetings with local investors, passionately presenting his project and the community support he had garnered. At these meetings, he demonstrated that his cafe concept was more than just a business. It was a social mission. One investor was so impressed that they offered him seed funding to open the first cafe. Throughout his fight, James faced significant pushback. Representatives from the bank began denying all accusations and even threatened him with a defamation lawsuit. But rather than being intimidated, James used this threat to draw even more attention to his story. His support grew, The community organized a fundraiser for his project, and his story became a hot topic on national news channels. At this point, James realized that simply opening a cafe wouldn't be enough. He set his sights on a far bigger goal: to rewrite the rules and ensure that stories like his would never happen again. His ambition was bold: to buy the very bank that had once rejected him. James Carter, backed by community support and investors, began preparing for his ultimate goal: to acquire the bank that had once rejected him. The bank's situation was deteriorating. Public outcry over its discriminatory practices had dealt a heavy blow to its reputation. Journalists continued publishing exposés, customers withdrew their accounts en masse, and the company's stock value plummeted. When the bank announced an upcoming auction to find a new owner, James knew his moment had arrived. However, buying a major bank was no simple task, and the competition was fierce. The auction attracted large financial corporations and private investors, including Andrew Hughes, the manager who had once humiliated James. To raise the necessary funds, James held a series of negotiations with partners who saw him as a promising leader and a symbol of the fight for equal opportunity. One such partner, an influential investor, publicly declared his support. James isn't just buying a bank, he's restoring justice. The day of the auction was filled with tension. James, dressed in a sharp suit, entered the room with his team of lawyers and economists. Despite the pressure, he remained composed. Andrew, upon noticing him, barely concealed his disdain. The bidding escalated quickly. Andrew Hughes made aggressive offers, determined to retain control of the bank. He underestimated James, viewing him as a minor competitor. But James was prepared to see this through to the end. When the bids exceeded the expected maximum, Andrew dramatically increased his offer, hoping to push James out of the race. That's when James revealed his strategy. His partners contributed the additional funds needed to deliver a decisive blow. The final bid rang out loud and confident. Realizing he had exhausted his resources, Andrew had no choice but to concede. When the auction concluded, James was announced as the bank's new owner. The news was a sensation. Journalists swarmed him with questions, and the public celebrated his victory as a triumph over injustice. Andrew left the room with a grim expression, but not before turning to James and saying, "You may have won today, but can you stay on top?" James met his gaze silently. He knew challenges lay ahead, but this moment marked a turning point in his life. The bank was now in his hands, and it was time to change the system. James Carter's first day as the bank's owner began with decisive action. Instead of celebrating his new position, he convened an emergency meeting with the bank's leadership. His primary goal was to dismantle the outdated and unjust practices that had obstructed equal opportunities for decades. James started with a thorough audit of the bank's lending policies. The legal and analytical teams he had hired uncovered dozens of cases where loan applications were denied based on arbitrary criteria that effectively discriminated against clients on racial grounds. This evidence was handed over to the Internal Investigations Department. Andrew Hughes, still present at the bank while awaiting his dismissal, tried to save face. He publicly offered to cooperate with the new leadership. However, James made a bold move. On the same day, he personally signed Hughes' termination notice, stating that the bank would no longer tolerate leaders who violated principles of fairness. Simultaneously, James initiated a series of reforms. He implemented new transparent criteria for evaluating loan applications, eliminating opportunities for discrimination. He also launched a program to support small businesses in underserved areas, offering subsidized loans and educational workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs. The public response was immediate. People who had long distrusted banks began opening accounts and applying to participate in the new programs. James's story inspired hundreds of minority entrepreneurs who saw that their dreams could become reality. The media closely followed these changes. Television networks aired interviews with James, where he detailed his journey. Social media buzzed with hashtags in his support, and major investors reached out to the bank to collaborate on his initiatives. Not everything went smoothly. The bank's former leadership, including Andrew, attempted to file a lawsuit, accusing James of aggressive policy shifts. However, the evidence of the bank's past violations quickly exposed their claims. The court not only dismissed their case, but also ordered restitution for clients harmed by discriminatory decisions. The crowning moment came with the opening of the bank's first branch in an underserved neighborhood where James had begun his career. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he addressed the gathered crowd. This bank will no longer be a symbol of injustice. It will now serve as a tool for change, helping those who are ready to fight for their dreams. His speech was met with thunderous applause. James Carter had not only defeated the system, but transformed it into a force for equality and fairness. His name became synonymous with the fight for justice and an inspiration for generations of entrepreneurs to come.